Welcome, everybody, to the Journey podcast. Today, I've got a really special guest, Coach Chad Prewett. What's up? How's it going?
What's up this morning?
We got two Prewetts on a podcast. That may be bad news.
That's trouble.
That is trouble. Welcome to the podcast studio. I know you've been in this studio before on some other podcasts that you've been guest on it. In the last year since, I believe, kind of formally retiring from Auburn University coaching basketball, right?
Retiring makes me sound old.
You are old.
I just
What are you
stepped
talking
away.
about?
I just stepped away for a short period of time. We'll see if retirement is the end result. But yeah, I've been in this the studio before with the Journey in the background. I love it.
There you go. A little free advertising there.
I love it.
Well, man, it's awesome to have you. We've been talking about having you on the podcast for the last few years since, I've been doing this podcast since we started the pest control company 5 years ago. But it's been kind of difficult to get on your calendar over the last, 10, 12, 13 years. Introduce yourself. Tell everybody who you are and what you got going on.
Yeah, obviously Chad Prewett, and this guy's brother right here, and known him for his entire life. I double bounced him on the trampoline back in the day.
Definitely double bounce.
But coached for 30 years, the last 11 years at Auburn University. Before that, 19 years as a high school coach. And so I was an athletic director at 25, jumped into some leadership places really early in my life, and had to learn how to lead pretty quickly, and it really served me well as we go through. And then the last 11 years at Auburn University, which many people know me from, and just loved that journey of going down that Division I road and watching us, 2 Final Fours in the last 6 years, 5 SEC championships in the last 8 years. And so just pretty cool to be able to do that at the highest level and the place that we love, Auburn University.
Absolutely. And I know today we're going to talk about some leadership stuff. So just for context for everybody listening. So today is actually December 31st, 2025. So we're going into a brand new year tomorrow. That time of year when everybody self-reflects and they're working on New Year's resolutions. They usually last maybe 2-3 days or maybe 2 or 3 weeks. I'm not sure. But I think this is pretty relevant as far as where our company has been over the past year and the journey we've had just in this last particular year. We call it a rebuilding year for what we've experienced with our company. And leadership is something that I know that I'm challenging myself to become a better leader next year. And what better leadership principles to learn from than the high school and collegiate basketball coach? I mean, you've seen it all. You've led all kinds in addition to other volunteer organizations that you've led and ministry and stuff. So just kind of walk us through that journey of high school basketball and to where you are, where you've been with Auburn University and how all that ties into leadership.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the term leadership is a broad term, and it goes a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. As being thrown into that leadership fire early in my life, I had to learn what the best style was for me. And I tried a bunch of different styles and failed at a few of those. And so you learn along the way. And, as I reflect back and I think about, okay, how did I build the person that I am? There's a term that I really studied called level up. And basically what it talks about is intentionally striving to become a better version of yourself. And so what I found out pretty early is if I'm a better person and if I'm a better leader, if I love more, if I'm more intentional, then my players would be more intentional and they would love more and I would get more out of them. And so I learned pretty early that if I invest in myself, I'm going to see the results, not just in myself, but those who are underneath me. So, I studied servant leadership. I wanted to lead by example without getting into a million different specifics. I'm a big believer in empowering people, and that scares a lot of leaders because when you empower people and you turn them loose, you no longer have your thumb on them. But I have a limit in myself if I'm going to try to control everything. But once I pour into somebody, train somebody and empower somebody, and then they can take us to a whole nother level. And if you do that across the board, all of a sudden you go from what Chad Prewett can do to what the team can do. And that's really, if you go back and look at it, a lot of my success has been through that empowerment.
You just touched on several things. It's like, man, have you been running around in my head in the last week, just preparing for this new year and new goals? I'm actually reading for the second time, John Maxwell's, the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. And he talks about that leveling up, and we talk about our lid and some others on our leadership team as we're preparing for this year, actually said we pick a theme word every year, and one of the suggestions was level up.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Swear to
wow.
you, like literally just a couple days ago, and we're going to announce our theme, and so maybe that's pretty fortuitous that's going to be
Yeah.
our word. I think what I've learned and what I've reflected on more recently with our team is we can have the best systems and processes, but if I'm not the best leader and I'm not the best version of myself, how can I expect my team to perform at that level? And John Maxwell talks about the law of the lid, right? And so if I'm, if I'm at a 5 or 6 on a scale of 1 to 10 of my leadership lid, people I lead are never going to be, they're never going to be above a 4 or 5, right? And so I've got to do a better job of being at that 8, 9, 10 to raise their lid. So talk about that and how that's applied in your life.
Yeah, and that's a man, first of all, the law of the lid, that's going back a while, and that's man, it's so, so true. What I've always tried to do is raise the level of expectation around me, because what I found out even when I was coaching middle schoolers is they will meet your expectation. And so, people would always say, Coach, you're never satisfied. You're never satisfied. And what they didn't understand was I was taking them from where they thought they could go to where God allowed them to go through
Right.
their abilities and their hard work and their coaching. And when I think about that whole law of the lid factor, it is so true. And so that's why, especially this time of the year, and obviously we didn't really plan this for
Right.
this being going into the new year, but the only way my team's going to be better, my business, my organization, my ministry is going to be better is if the leader gets better. And so, what if we intentionally decided this year that we were going to be a better version of ourselves? Now, obviously, you talked about processes and so many things, and those are important. But when you talk about, I used to say you can coach them as hard as you love them. So, why did people not just turn around and walk off my team when we were nose to nose and I was screaming at their, in their face to do better? Because they knew I loved them. And so I can push harder when my team realizes that I'm in it for the same thing they're in, and that is to get the most out of them. And all I'm trying to do is help you get there. Everybody doesn't love tough coaching. And I learned over the years that I couldn't coach everybody exactly the same.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, they have to know, the team, the business, the ministry has to know that I love them, and I want what's best for them.
That's absolutely right. And I think investing in ourselves first to raise our own lid, it starts with us, right? As leaders, it starts with us in order to pour into others. And I know I can do a better job of loving on the people that I lead. So when you do have to have that difficult conversation, they know it's coming from a place of love
That's
and
right.
not a place out of just disappointment or dissatisfaction. I know we had growing up, we had sort of our own mentor, if you will, and someone who was constantly pouring into us into being better versions of ourselves. And I know we joke about it all the time, but talk about our mentor that we grew up and how that impacted kind of you in your leadership, because people ask, hey, is leadership learned? Are you born with it? Like, what's your viewpoint on that if someone wants to become a better leader?
Which mentor would you be speaking of?
Let's see, a lady by the name of GP, right?
As in mom.
As in mom,
The ultimate
the
the
ultimate.
ultimate leader and
Yeah.
mentor. I actually talk about her often when I'm speaking across the country, just because, she was such a rock, a foundation for us that made us strive to be better versions of ourselves. And I can still remember she gave me a little can one time that I was supposed to put my loose change in. It was called the I can. I'm like, come on, mom, give it a
The
break.
I can
I
can. I
can.
don't
I
remember
know I
the I
can.
can can.
And so, early on, we were pushed to try to be better. And it started with her and her belief in us. And it showed me not only that she believed in me, but what happened is I started believing in myself. And the most dangerous person in this world is the person that believes in themselves. You want to see somebody that can really achieve things that are outside the box. It's somebody who has that self belief. And so, how do you have that? I think you've got to take time for yourself. You can't give away what you don't have. You can't teach what you don't know. And so I've got to take time every single day to become that better version of myself. And depending on what that is for your life, faith is important for me. So I spend time in the word every morning and talking to God and basically saying, God, what do you want me to know? What do you want me to do today?
Mhm.
And what if we started our day asking our creator, what he would like for me to do and how he would like to use me? And so as we started in those early years, of being around somebody that believed in ourselves, you can become very goal oriented. And I think that's super important. You mentioned the word processes earlier that makes me think about, the goals are only as good as the processes
Right.
behind them. We can start this year off with 10 great goals that we want to reach. If we don't have a plan to get there, all they're going to be is wasted
Right.
words on a piece of paper. And so putting those processes together, I believe in goals. I believe in process. I believe in habits. I believe, you are what you
Hmm.
habitually do. You are what you repeatedly do. And that's where excellence comes in. If you can make those things that make you a better version of yourself, you got a chance to succeed. And those teams and that business around you can do the same.
Absolutely. And I think, going back to mom and, a lot of the things I remember from growing up is like, you can move mountains. I'm like, Mom, what do you move a mountain? Like that doesn't even make sense. But like, there's a mountain right there. How am I going to move it? Like, why would I want to move a mountain? Like, and it's really about having the mindset, right? And I think you and I, we had breakfast the other day and we talked about mindset and how important mindset is. And so touch on that. If you're giving advice to someone about how do they get their mind right, because if we get our mind right, then we can start working on the other things. But if we don't believe in ourselves and we don't have the right mindset, we're never going to make progress, right?
Yeah, I think it starts with being still. And I think you've got to find as a leader, and we've already talked about this before, but you got to find time to invest in
Hmm.
yourself. What ends up happening is a lot of leaders are running on empty because they're giving, they're giving, they're giving, and they're not receiving. They're not taking time to take care of themselves. And so, for me, it's two times right before I go to bed at night. I'm thinking about, things I'm going to do tomorrow and how I'm going to get some things done. And then I'm starting off the next day in some time just to be still. That's not always prayer time. It does involve prayer for me, and I read the word, etc. But just quietness. What happens in this world, there's so much noise that we can't
Hmm.
really wrap our mind around what we want to achieve that day. And so we just go from place to place and we let people dictate our day.
Right.
And the real leader, the best leaders, they don't let someone else dictate their day.
Right.
They have a plan for what they want it to look. And so, I'm old school with lists. I still write down things on pieces of paper. And of course, I use my phone and reminders as well. But if you were to walk in my office, and you did a few times over the years at Auburn, you would have saw a fourth or a third of my desk was covered in sticky notes, yellow
Right.
sticky notes. And I would write down what I needed to accomplish. And it would be just one after the other lined up. And then once I did that, I'd grab it, throw it in the
Throw it in the
trash because,
trash.
I think you've got to find a way as a leader to be successful based on your personality, based on how you're wired. And so many times we watch a podcast or we see someone and we say, I want to be that guy. But God made us all different.
That's right.
So how can you be the leader that God wants you to be? And I think it's using the tools that He's given you.
Totally. And you talk about getting your mind right and being quiet and being still. And we talked about this at breakfast the other day. And so, if I'm waking up on two wheels or hitting my alarm clock 10 different times and getting up and having to rush to take a shower and to get ready and go to work, I mean, how am I preparing myself, right? So I know there's been a season of my life this year where I was out in the field a lot. You and I joked about it, right? I'm out there spraying houses, man. I'm out there killing bugs. I'm going to all four corners of the state. And that was also a time where I couldn't stop running the business. I mean, the business doesn't stop running just because I'm out in the field and, treating home. So I'm like, all right, well, I've got to wake up an hour earlier every day now to have that time, right? Because that's my reflection time. And that's for me, it's 5 o'clock in the morning with a cup of coffee and my laptop out or my journal. And we have to be intentional about creating that time
Yes.
or the day controls you.
Yes.
How do you, especially particularly with Auburn basketball, and I know it was this way when high school basketball as well. How many championships did we win in high school?
We won 21, 10 basketball, and 11 actually in track and field. People don't know that. And I never get asked that question
the,
about the other 11. Everybody wants to talk about the basketball ones,
the
but
track and
yeah,
field, all
how about
right.
that?
And I do remember you were a long jumper and a high jumper back in high school yourself.
And triple jump. Nobody knew how to triple jump, so I took advantage of
The
that.
triple jump. Most people don't even know what that is,
Yes.
much less when you see someone do it poorly.
Uh,
It's pretty comical. When we talk about the number of hours that you put into work, right? I mean, talk about the journey, particularly with Auburn basketball. When we hired a new basketball coach, Coach Bruce Pearl, you came on board on his staff, and you guys were. I mean, you're talking about tearing something down and starting from scratch to build what you did over the course of the last decade. Talk about that. I mean, you're talking about leadership at the ground level, starting and grinding. I mean, kind of talk about the beginning of that and how that evolved over the years.
Yeah, I look back and for whatever reason, God allowed me to be a part of programs that had not really won at a high level before I got there. And then we were able to achieve success. And so a lot of people have said, okay, what happened? Not just at Auburn, because the world saw that, but what
Right.
happened at Escambia Academy or Faith Academy or Lee Scott Academy? And, the thing that jumps off the page at me right now is the old adage of let's get 1% better today. And so, like, when you look at, and your mom talked about climbing a mountain, you don't do all that at one time.
Right.
And so, I just want to stack some daily improvements, some small improvements every single day, and don't focus on the end result. Focus on, and it sounds like a leadership podcast to say this, but focus on the process. Just focus on today. I want to get better today. And then what are we going to do tomorrow? We're going to get better today. And the
Mhm.
next day, we're going to get better today. And then you do that over the course of the year. When I was coaching, we would do some of the fundamental drills every single day. And, you can see guys like rolling their eyes. We're going
Right.
to do the same drill. Yes, we are. And what's going to happen over the course of the years, we're going to continue to better, and we're going to make those things habits. And so, can you make hard work a habit? I think you can. And you put some drills into place where you make those individual things a habit. And at the end of the year, if you've done a good job as a coach and a teacher, you've gotten a lot better. Now, if you have the talent to match that, you do extraordinary things. You
Right.
don't always have that kind of talent. But what I always wanted to do and what I felt like God has given me a gift to do is to get the most out of you. I want to get all the potential that you have out of you and be the best version of yourself. And if that's not good enough to win a championship, that's okay. We still win. But I just think those daily improvements are so important in the coaching world. And you look at in your world as well. If we can just, if we can just as a business get a little bit better every single day and we can build on those, we call that stacking. If you can stack those days, you'd be surprised at the end of the year where you end up.
Absolutely. So how do you when you're leading others, because I think we all agree and can agree with what you said of every incremental improvement every single day. How do you keep the focus to do that? Having the focus every single day, because next thing you know, you've gone a week and you haven't done those drills, or you did it for a week or two, and then once the new wore off, then you just kind of move on to something else, or your team does. How do you stay disciplined and focus on that?
I think every team, every ministry, every business has to have some non negotiables. And so if we do 20 periods of 5 minutes, whatever that looks like, 3 to 5 minutes every single day, there's going to be, 4 or 5 periods that are non negotiables. And so I don't care who we're playing tomorrow. I don't care if it's the best team in the country or the worst team. There's 3 or 4 to 5 things that we're going to do every single day on a Coach Pruitt team. I can't always control that when I'm not the head coach, but if I'm in control, we're going to do certain things every single day. And that's how you control that. So don't try to do everything every day.
Mhm.
Find those non negotiables for your company, for your business, for your team, and say, look, we may not be, because you end up becoming great at what you emphasize. You can't emphasize everything, but there's got to be some things that you hang your hat on.
Right.
Like when people used to watch us play, they'd say, how do y'all play so hard? It's because it's a non negotiable.
Right, right.
You know, we used to literally, and Tanya mentioned this the other day, we literally would line the players up on the side and we count them off by numbers 1, 2, 1, 2, all the way down. And we called your number out. I would roll the ball down the middle of the floor. And if I called one, the ones would go do whatever they had to do to get that ball. And so, like for us, being the first on the floor was a non negotiable. We're not going to reach for the ball. We're going to tackle the ball. And
Absolutely.
so there's some things that you can hang your hat on. That I can't emphasize 10 things like that. But our teams were always going to play harder than your teams. Our team was always going to be more prepared than your team. So we're going to spend, that's something I can control. I'm going to be
Mhm.
prepared. I mentioned this quote, I think to you the other day. It's one of my favorite quotes. Abraham Lincoln said, if I got 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'm going to take the first 4 hours and sharpen my axe. Okay. That is preparation.
Mm.
When we talk about leadership, sharpening your axe is something you control. No, the world doesn't control your axe. You do. And so I need to make sure that it's sharp. That's taking time, preparing yourself, doing the things it takes to be that better version of yourself.
Absolutely. So that goes right in line with what we're talking about, raising your lid, and I'll think back a few years ago with my Allstate business. I remember having, our team, and there was a particular person that I was always trying to make them into something that they weren't necessarily, right? So, you got your A's, B's, and C's on a team, right? You want to get your C's to B's, B's to A's, et cetera, right? And I was trying to make this B player, which is a great, solid player, trying to make them an A. And I was trying to make them into something they weren't in the lane I was trying to ask them to be in. And finally, one day, it hit me. I'm like, I need to try to maximize his potential, not what his potential is for what I want him to do, but his potential. And it changed my mindset. And so then I'm trying to make him the best version of himself. Fast forward a few years to where I am now personally self reflecting going into this new year is I can do that with each one of my team members. But what about my own potential? Am I giving it 110%? Am I doing the discipline and the things that I need to do to raise my own lid so I can raise their lid, right? So what are some things that you've experienced when you do have a team you're leading and trying to get people to be that better version of themselves? What's your experience with different players and different talent levels and different levels of effort?
Johnny might be the best shooter on my team, but he's nothing if the point guard doesn't get the ball to
Mm,
him. And so like I was a big coach that believed on roles, and nobody's role was better than anybody else's. It was just different. I was coaching girls basketball. I said, Jesse Washington is going to shoot this ball. So I'm going to call some stuff, but at the end of the day, she better shoot it. I need you to pass it to her. I need you two girls right here to go get it if she misses it. And so like it's all about filling the role, and so many times we place a higher thought process on somebody who can do something that's more flashy. I got three girls, and I've got one of my girls is one of those girls that everybody knows, and she has a gift of public speaking. It doesn't make her any more important in our family or in this world than my other two girls who love and care for the things that people don't see. So many times you get caught up in that flashy, that thing, that the person that's doing that thing that everybody sees, but none of it happens if we don't work together. And so like for me, I wanted to make sure that the person on my team that may not have the flashiest role understood that we can't be successful if they don't do their part. And that's the key to success. The key to success is everybody's got, we used to say at Auburn, the margin's really, really slim between, say, second place and 10th place because everybody's got a great player.
hmm
How good is number 7, 8, 9, and 10 on your team? So if we can build up the back end of that roster, the depths over the course of the year is going to really pay off for us. And so, I say to people all the time, don't focus on just that star.
hmm
Everybody's got a star.
Right.
Can we develop that person that may even feel unseen? A person that gets overlooked. We need that person to be the best version of themselves, which allows us for the team to be really, really good. And so, again, I would say, hey, I have you on this team to rebound. I have you on this team to pass. I have you on this team to shoot. The shooter wasn't more important than the
Right,
passer.
right. Totally. It's a team, right?
It is.
So we're talking about, developing people, raising their lid and, there's motivation and there's inspiration, right? And when I think of motivation, I think a little bit more short term, a little burst of energy, a little burst of something versus inspiration. How have you inspired those that you've led, particularly when you're pushing them to their limits? I mean, you're pushing them harder because you see what their potential is. A lot of times where they don't see it. What are some words of wisdom you have when it comes to inspiring a team?
Yeah, I think you've got to always make them or show them where you want them to go.
Mm,
Like again, I think so many times we push, but they don't really know where we're trying to get them. And so I think true inspiration, first of all, is internally
mm,
motivated. And so how do you do that? I believe you develop the whole person. If my players only think that I care about them because they can put a ball in a basket, I haven't done a really good job, and I really honestly am a losing coach. But if I can get the most out of them on the floor, but also get the most of them as we develop them as a young person, as a young lady, as a young man, then I have a chance to really, really be successful. And so, I believe if I build a greater person, a greater man, a
mm.
greater player, and we do that across the board, the team's going to be better. And so I want to, I always said, look, and I never let the day go by. I may chew somebody out, and really lose my mind in practice. I would never let the day go by when I didn't tell them I loved them and believed in them. And so a lot of times I had to do that kind of biting my lip because I didn't really want to. But it was important for the team for me to be able to get the best version of themselves because it's best for the team. And so I would go back and just say, look, I'm only trying to make you better. I always used to say, let me coach you hard. The best players I've ever coached allowed me to coach them hard. And they would say, I know you're just trying to do the best for me. Those are rare. They're rare. And so how do you deal with those ones that don't say that,
Right.
and that's where you got to have true inspiration. And again, you got to show them, I believe you can raise that level of expectation. And what I've seen more times than not, I believe in positive peer pressure. As people start buying in, those fringe people start jumping on board as well. And people say, well, how did you do that when you didn't win? You go back and look at the first year at Auburn. We go through a really difficult year with not a ton of talent.
Mm-hmm.
But Coach Pearl every single day started talking about, hey, we're going to make a run in the tournament. We're going to make a run in the tournament, SEC tournament. And I'm sure all of these players are, looking around like, Coach, we're having a hard time beating anybody. How are we going to make a run? Well, we go to the SEC tournament. We win Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we're playing Kentucky on a Saturday at the SEC tournament because we believe that's where we were going. And over the course of the year, going back to those daily things that we were stacking, we put ourselves in a position to make a run in the tournament. And so you've got to inspire. Some of that's motivation, some of that's inspiration. I think you need both.
That's awesome. I mean, totally. And I think, I talked about so many different things with leadership and your journey and tie all those things in. And I think this will be a two-part podcast, right? So we'll divide this into two. And so as we wrap up this first part, when we come back in the second part of this series, I want us to talk about particularly how you guys developed your players off the court, right? And so I know that's a big part of what you did, developing young men and women in high school. I know that you've got a huge following of people you've made long-term impacts to, which is life-changing for people. And I know you guys have done that on and off the court at Auburn University. So when we come back for part two, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the passion and what drove you guys and how you guys created that culture at Auburn University. How's that?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.